This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benneroff, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. And me, Peter Katz, formerly with NBC, ABC News, and stations from Boston to Los Angeles. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, and all you petition signers out there. We hope they were clear and legible, right?
Well, that was a very slow fade-in, stolen from Warner Brothers, 1942.
Yeah, we never
Betty
have
Davis
that.
movie that had that dramatic effect. Yeah.
Yes.
We're
now
much less
Voyager. Now Voyager. Now, Jim Benneroff, of course, is on assignment tonight, and I'm with the anchor for all season, whom you saw just speak, Peter Katz. Now the headlines for the White Plains Week of July 14th, 2017. Councilwoman Milagros Lacuna and her council running mates filed their petitions to primary the mayor and Democratic Party council candidates. She says the delay in the FASNY decision is playing politics, and that is what's wrong with this administration. Neighbors disturbed by mosquito breeding ground on FASNY property, alleged mosquito breeding ground. Two sentenced in 2016 1991 Kensico Avenue revenge killing in White Plains. Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities overturns Common Council decision to deny a group home in Prospect Park neighborhood. City weighs appeal. Sheldon Silver's conviction for bribery is overturned by federal appeals court based on a Supreme Court decision and a procedural matter. Peter Katz will have his weekly report, Trump the President. An iceberg the size of the state of Delaware breaks off Antarctica. Amelia Earhart documentary photo touted as evidence the intrepid aviator and her navigator survived after their disappearance, found to be taken in 1935, not 1937, when the two disappeared into eternity. First ever genetically altering potential cure for cancer that genetically alters a patient's own cells to fight the disease is recommended to the FDA for approval. A significant, astounding medical development. The Westchester County economy pulls in $30 million in movie shoots filmed in 2016. The county also breaks even on its budget in 2016 by selling 2 properties, increased mortgage taxes despite overestimating sales tax, auditors say. George Latimer, running against County Executive Robert Astorino, is endorsed by 2 unions, the SEIU and the CPW. White Plains homes inventory continues tight in the second quarter, ending in June. 48 to 38 more homes were sold. From the 2016 median price, $563,597. Average price, $617,000. Average days on market, that's really improving, 2 months. More homes being listed in June. Lifting Westchester introduces new executive director, Anaheda Kotval, as Paul Anderson Winchell retires after 11 years. Don't forget Pet Adoption Day at Westchester Broadway Theater next Saturday. And computer experts urge you not to post iPhone photos on the internet. Your identity and phone number and personal information can be collected by GPS info embedded in the photo. And now, Peter.
Yes?
The Rolo Newsreel March of Time. And yesterday...
Who are all those people?
Yes.
My goodness.
That's Milagros Lacuna, when she announced that she was going to run for mayor, in the lower right and up top, and those are Michael Craver, Alan Goldman, and Saad Siddiqui, and those 4 persons filed petitions Thursday morning. Ms. Lacuna said she had about 2,700, and that the 3 council hopefuls had about 2,400 signatures. So now they have to be approved by the Board of Elections, and that means that there may very well be a primary.
Well, we'll see if their petitions, all the signatures turn out to be legitimate signatures, then the Board of Elections will have to allow their names to be put on the ballot.
Yes,
and we will see
and if
what
all
happens.
paperwork is filed in a timely manner, that's another way that you can possibly, even though you may have signature, if you forget one little item, you can be.
Yeah, well, the White Plains City Committee will have its slate of candidates, and so then it will be up to the voters. Now, typically in a September primary, not that many people turn out to vote.
September the 12th is the primary date, folks.
It's almost as if there's a school board election rather than a primary.
Right, and speaking of the school board, the new superintendent of schools, Dr. Joseph Ricca, took over Monday evening. We'll hope to talk about that next week. Now, speaking of FASD, a couple of neighbors were walking through my neighborhood, and they told me about a condition existing on the pond at the Ridgeway Golf Course. This is the way it looked years ago.
Well, the former Ridgeway Golf Course. The former Ridgeway Club. Where FASD, the French-American School of New York, wants to build its school.
Right. Now, next slide. And they aerated it. That way, it does not turn into this. Next slide. A green scum pond.
Okay, well, the previous slide said Ridgeway yesterday.
Right.
You don't mean yesterday, you mean yesteryear.
It's the pejorative
a long
yesterday,
time
Peter.
ago.
Right. But
because
I mean,
the water
in
the photo that said yesterday looked beautifully blue.
Very true, but I wanted to point out that to have a standing pond on a golf course, they have to aerate it because that happens in the summer heat. And considering our West Nile virus efforts and the fact that ponds can be breeding places for mosquitoes, neighbors are saying, the ones I spoke to, that there is a big mosquito problem over there. I asked the FASD spokespeople if they have done anything about that or plan to. They didn't get back to me.
Well, have any, you know, if any of the neighbors called the Westchester County Health Department to advise them that some mosquito control may be needed? If
well,
that's what they
I
think.
would suggest that they do that. I would suggest that they do that. Besides, that's just really, that's as bad as Silver Lake ever was.
We could start a rumor that alligators are growing under all of that algae.
That could be. Now, there was 2 people who were sentenced this week. Aaron George of White Plains and Michael Djukic of White Plains for the murder. Mr. George was convicted on 1 count of murder in the 2nd degree, a Class A felony, and 1 count of possession of a weapon in the 2nd degree. Mr. Djukic was convicted of 1 count of attempted criminal felicitation in the 2nd degree, a Class D felony, and a count of hindering prosecution. Now,
did they set a sentencing date yet?
Should be in here in the press. No, it was not in the press release, so they haven't done the sentencing date yet. And the murder took place, not there, but in the previous shot at 91 North Kensico Avenue on April 17th. Now we go to another decision. Next slide. This is 22 New York Avenue, Peter, and the Office of Persons with Developmental Disabilities.
Yeah, that's where there was an application for a group home, and it was kind of a controversial issue.
Yeah.
The people from Prospect Park went to City Hall when the Common Council was considering this and voiced their opposition to it.
Right.
Common Council said, no, we're not going to allow them to turn this single-family house into a group home. And so the state has now stepped in to override the decision made by the Common Council.
Now the question is whether the city appeals this. And they have quite a bit of time to do that. Next, another overturn, and this was a big one. Sheldon Silver's conviction for bribery was overturned by federal appeals court.
Well, Sheldon Silver made his career really as an attorney in Manhattan and as the leader of the New York State Assembly for decades, as a very, very powerful figure in New York State. And he was convicted on corruption charges for using his political influence
and
in
allegedly
exchange,
receiving $400 million
money. Mm-hmm. And the reason that this was overturned really did not go to the merits of the case or the prosecution, but rather to an error made by the presiding judge when he instructed the jury about the law they needed to consider in their deliberations. And sometimes these things happen where the defendants find mistakes made by a judge and use that to overturn the conviction. In this case, what we hear instantly from the prosecutors is that they intend to retry Mr. Silver. The question, of course, is, can Silver be assured of a fair trial, of a fair jury, in a retrial because of all the publicity that this has generated?
That is going to be a big problem.
And because many people feel that no matter what they decided about the charge to the jury made by the judge in the case, Silver is guilty anyway.
Yeah. Well, it will unfold in the months ahead. Maybe they could have it in Russia. Nobody knows them there.
The next question goes to the conviction of the Republican counterpart.
Yes.
Up in Albany.
Yeah.
In the annals of corruption, Dean Scalos.
Yes.
And his son. And the question being raised now is, does this mean that it's likely that the Scalos convictions will be overturned? Now, all of this is based upon a Supreme Court ruling which came out after these cases had gone
regarding the governor of Virginia.
And what the Supreme Court said, in essence, was that you can't convict unless you can prove what's called a quid pro quo. In other words, that there is a direct tie-in between someone using their office to politically benefit someone who then directly has provided a payoff to the politician. So they must demonstrate this quid pro quo, the action. I do something, you do something, and they are absolutely interrelated, intertwined.
Right, but it could be just coincidental. Oh, I was just approving something routine. It's very difficult. I think you're going to see very few bribery cases.
It could be as simple, as my saying that John.
I'll trade you lunch for videos.
John, I will see to it that you get a lunch.
Yes.
If you see to it that I get a bigger paycheck for doing this program.
Like that. Absolutely. Right.
Quid pro quo.
Right. Now, we've come to that time when it's time to check in on Trump the President with Peter Katz. And, of course, Trump time, 1,183 days left in his first term. And a lot happened this week. It seems a lot happens every week with this administration.
Well, President Trump...
It's a big sigh, ladies and gentlemen.
...is in France for Bastille Day.
Yes.
But even if he's out of the country, the White House continues in turmoil. As of this morning, we learn there were not 3 people meeting with the Russian who promised to give the Trump campaign damaging information about Hillary Clinton. There were at least 6 people, maybe 7, in the secret meeting at Trump Tower in New York. NBC News broke that story this morning. And it appears that initially, at least, one of the attorneys for the people involved says, yeah, there were a lot of people in this meeting. Hardcore Trump supporters believe that the whole Russian story has been made up by the news media, even though the Trump administration now admits that some of it is true. And even the president himself now admits that the Russians interfered.
You're sounding more like Walter Kiernan every day.
And those admissions by the White House seem to prove that the president was lying early on when he denied Russian involvement
It's his style.
in the election.
Yeah.
President Trump held the door open to a reversal of his decision to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord in Paris, but he did not say what he would need in return to persuade him to reverse his decision. Now, Trump made this statement in Paris, where he was meeting with French President Macron. Something happened with respect to the Paris Accords. Let's see what happens, Trump told a news conference. If it happens, and that's reversing the decision by Trump to pull out of the Paris Accord, if it happens, that will be wonderful. And if it doesn't, that will be okay too.
So what's his policy?
What's his position?
Yes,
His
waffling.
position is on both sides.
Yes, he's a waffle.
We're going to pull out. We're going to stay in. We'll see.
Hey,
we
we'll
won't see.
What do you got to do for me? Yeah.
President Trump was overheard complimenting the French First Lady on her physical appearance during a photo op in Paris. Video of the encounter was posted on the French government's Facebook page. In the video, Trump turns to President Macron's wife, Bridget, and says, quote, "You're in such good shape."
You're in good shape too, Peter.
He then repeated the comment about the wife to the French president. And then he turned back to the French president's wife and said, "Beautiful."
Maybe he was just being complimentary.
You suppose?
Maybe, yes. Right.
Senator Mitch McConnell, you remember him. He still doesn't have the votes to pass his latest version of the Trump Care bill, which was drafted in secret over the 4th of July weekend. McConnell was in his home state of Kentucky, where his bill will eliminate health care for 230,000 of McConnell's own Kentuckians.
That's looking out for you.
The Congressional Budget Office found the new bill will kick $22 million off health insurance, would reduce Medicaid spending by $772 billion over the next decade. Now that's a change because the number we had heard had been $800 billion. So this is only a $772 billion cut in Medicaid. 15 million fewer Medicaid recipients will be covered. States would have to either raise taxes or cut spending elsewhere to make up the difference, or they would have to reduce Medicaid benefits.
Or Medicaid fraud.
That would affect, it would affect people who really don't care because they're in nursing homes.
Yeah. Yes, but it's a
the new bill
for that.
The new bill for Trump Care adds a tax break favored by conservatives. Another tax break, right, that primarily helps higher income families. This new tax break would allow them to pay for premiums on individual insurance plans using tax-exempt contributions to a health savings account. That's something the Republicans have wanted for years.
Yes.
Now, lower income households don't have money to set up a health savings account. Therefore, they're not going to be able to take advantage of that new tax cut. The new bill would cut off Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid payments. Insurers would not be allowed to offer insurance plans eligible for subsidies that cover abortion. President Trump defended his son Donald Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer who promised damaging information about Hillary Clinton from the Russian government by blaming the media for making, Trump's words, quote, a very big deal over something that really a lot of people would do. Well,
really?
John, you would have a meeting with a Russian lawyer, wouldn't you?
Of course.
There's a trail of emails showing that Donald Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law, conspired with the Russian lawyer by that meeting at Trump Tower during the campaign. She has been tied to the Putin regime, and she was in New York to help defend Russian mobsters accused of stealing $230 million from the Russian treasury and hiding at least some of that money in New York real estate investments.
Ooh.
Federal attorney Preet Bharara was investigating this, and he was putting these defendants on trial when President Trump fired him.
Now, isn't that a coincidence? It's sort of like that bribery thing we were talking about a few minutes ago, right?
House Republicans voted this week to block an effort aimed at revoking the security clearance of White House senior advisor Jared Kushner.
Yes.
Several members of Congress have questioned the appropriateness of Kushner maintaining a security clearance following all of these reports about his involvement with Russians. Christopher Wray, President Trump's pick for FBI director, vowed at his confirmation hearing this week to uphold strict independence at the FBI if he is
Way
confirmed.
to go, Chris. Way to go.
Wray testified that he'd conduct his job, quote, without regard to any partisan political influence. Here's a quote from him. "I believe to my core that there's only one right way to do this job," he told the Senate Judiciary Committee, and that is with strict independence, by the book, playing it straight, faithful to the Constitution. Sounds good?
Certainly does.
It does. It also sounds
give
like
him about a month. I give him a month.
it also sounds like something Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch said at his confirmation hearing, only to begin making decisions along right-wing political lines once he got on the court.
True. Well,
have you had enough? I have.
That is an amazing week. When you all wrap it up into a capsule like that.
And that's only part of it.
Only part of it. Oh, here's some interesting stuff. Speaking of climate change, we have a new iceberg. It's the size of Delaware. That's a shot supplied by the agency that keeps tracks of this sort of stuff. And it was on the front page of the Times. And that is the crack that opened it up. And they assure us, though, that this isn't going to melt. It's mostly dirt underneath all that ice, so it's not going to raise the sea level.
I don't know what's under that ice, but I had seen a figure that if you take that ice and spread it out so it covers the entire country, the entire U.S., the ice would be up to 5 inches thick.
Whoa!
Now the question,
that's an amazing.
The question that has been raised is whether, as all of this melts, which it eventually will do, as it floats freely, will it raise the sea level? And apparently this will not. Apparently,
that's what they say.
because of the physics involved in this. As you may or may not know, when water freezes into ice, it expands.
Right.
So just looking at this, the size of Delaware, it's not as if you're adding a whole bunch of water the size of Delaware.
Float an ice cube in your drink tonight, folks, and you'll see whether or not it increases the water level.
Nonetheless, there is great concern as to what this says about the ongoing effects of global warming, which, as we know, Trump says...
Penguin airlift now.
Which, as we know, the Trump administration supports the president's position taken during the campaign, that global warming was a hoax made up by the Chinese. The question is, what does this reflect, and does it show that, maybe we are closer to the point of no return than we thought in terms of being able to do something about this?
But what caused it to crack? Was it perhaps an earthquake or something? That would be...
No, what causes it to crack is the weight, the free-flowing weight. Yeah, it's stress. You've seen a stress fracture. I could start talking about airplanes and how wings.
Speaking of airplanes, we have an airplane story here.
All right, well, we'll get to that in a second. But what happens is if you have a small crack, it eventually propagates and becomes a very big crack.
True. Anyway, last couple of weeks we've been talking about Amelia Earhart, the great Amelia Earhart, and there was a documentary that appeared on the History Channel Sunday, which I watched, and in it there was this photograph which supposedly showed the back of a person believed to be Amelia Earhart, and
those people who were involved in producing this program discovered this photograph in the Navy archives, and by blowing it up in sections of it, and you see the enlargements there, they indicated that the fellow on the left in the inset was Fred Noonan, her navigator. That's Amelia Earhart,
and that is her
plane,
middle,
and the plane on the right.
Far right. However,
Peter, it turns out that this photograph was not taken when Amelia Earhart had disappeared. This photograph was taken in 1935, 2 years earlier than her disappearance.
Same photo. So once again, the mystery of Amelia Earhart continues. Now, movies in Westchester County. The county economy gained some $30 million due to movie shoots in the county. That's Meryl Streep shooting a movie in White Plains.
Steven Spielberg has been shooting a picture based upon the Pentagon Papers story, the expose with the Washington Post published the Pentagon Papers. Meryl Streep is in the picture. Tom Hanks is in the picture. They've been shooting in White Plains. Primarily based at the old AT&T building, which was transformed in part into the newsroom of the Washington Post in the early 1970s.
Right. Now, have to go.
Anyway, so that $36 million that the county talks about, $30 million, includes revenues, fees paid to municipalities like White Plains for the use of locations. It also includes impact to the economy, spending in restaurants, and so forth.
Okay, now I have to get to this. The shocker of the week was the fact that there is a new method to treat cancer. It's been used to treat 52 persons in trial, 32 of whom have survived and are in remission. And the story was the lead story in the New York Times yesterday. This is a good news thing, and it's being recommended by an FDA panel that the FDA approve it.
Now, basically what it does is it uses genetics to allow the body's immune system to locate, track down, and kill cancer cells. The implication is that one of these days you'll be able to have custom-made drugs that will attack the specific cancer that is affecting you.
This is a tremendous discovery, and we hope they move it along. Lifting Westchester, they have a new executive director, Anaheda Cottville, as Paul Anderson Winchell is retiring after 11 years. Don't forget, Pet Adoption Saturday, next Saturday.
July 22nd, Westchester Broadway Theater. No tickets needed. Everyone's invited to go pick a new member of the family to take home.
John Bailey, Peter Katz, for Jim Beneroff, good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week. News and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.